In this video, we're going to talk about what a systematic review is, so you know exactly what you're looking for your critique of systematic reviews assignment. So a systematic review is a type of literature review, and the idea is that it's designed to answer a very specific clinical question. So if you were working with a patient, you wouldn't necessarily have time to go out and search for and read all of the most current literature about your patient's situation. That would take you a very long time. So systematic reviews were designed to review all of the most up-to-date literature and to present the best possible evidence so that a clinician will be able to look at it very quickly and make a decision about how to treat their patient. So a systematic review includes a very comprehensive search of the literature and also very specific eligibility criteria for the studies that are included. So in a typical literature review or a narrative review, you wouldn't necessarily know exactly how the researchers found the articles that they're using and how they decided what they were going to include, what they weren't going to include. A systematic review will be very transparent about that. It will tell you exactly how they found the studies and how they decided what fit and what was outside the scope of their review. A systematic review will also assess the quality of the studies that are included. So if they have concerns about particular limitations of a study or the way that a study was done, anything like that, then they'll make that very clear. So you'll know as you're skimming the review that the results of that study might not be quite as valid as the results of different studies. And all of this is done with an aim to minimize bias as much as possible. So if you're doing a literature review and you don't know how the researcher conducted the search, how they chose what they were and weren't going to include, if they didn't assess the quality of the studies, then there is the possibility that bias is going to creep into that review. So a systematic review follows this very specific procedure in order to minimize bias and present the best possible evidence. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So this first one here is just a literature review, or what's called a narrative review. So as you look through this review, you'll notice that it's broken into sections by topic. So the authors who conducted this review presumably did a lot of research on the topic. They pooled all of the information that they found into particular themes, and they're summarizing what the literature says about these themes. So this can be very valuable for learning about a particular topic. But you just want to be careful if you see something like this. It's a different type of literature review. If you don't see a method section or some of the other sections that we're going to talk about in a minute, if you just see some topic headings and then descriptions of what the literature says about each one of those, then you're probably looking at a narrative literature review rather than a systematic review. So for comparison, let's look at this systematic review. So you'll notice right away that it says systematic review in the title, and this will almost always be the case. And that's because systematic reviews are very highly regarded, they're very valuable for clinicians and other researchers. So it's become best practice to include the word systematic review right in the title to let you know up front that you're looking at a systematic review. And if you do find an article that says it's a systematic review, you just want to scroll through and make sure that it looks like a systematic review to confirm. Every once in a while, you might find an article that says systematic review somewhere in the title, but they might not be following the same criteria that you would use. You wouldn't necessarily call it a systematic review. So the vast majority of articles you find in the databases that call themselves systematic reviews will meet this criteria, but you just want to double check rather than taking it for granted. So if you scroll through, rather than seeing topic headings, you'll see what looks more like research headings. So there will always be a methodology or method section that describes exactly how the researchers found the studies that they did and how they decided what they were going to include, what they were not going to include. And we'll talk about how they analyzed all of the studies. So you can see this one talks about the eligibility criteria, how they decided which studies were inside the scope and outside the scope of their research question. The information sources section talks about the different databases that they searched. A lot of times you'll see that they will even list the keywords or subjects that they searched, their search strategy, how they selected particular studies. So it's telling you exactly how they conducted this systematic review. So you know exactly how they did it, and you could go out and reproduce this and hopefully get the same results. You'll notice there's also a section here that talks about risk of bias, because again, systematic reviews are always thinking about how to reduce bias as much as possible. And one other thing that you'll often see in systematic reviews are tables that list all of the studies that they included and break down different factors in the studies, and a flow chart that looks like this. So the flow chart describes the databases that were searched, how many articles showed up in their initial search. And then they don't include every single article that comes up in the search because some are not actually going to be relevant for their research question. So this explains exactly how they excluded studies, how they got to the final number of studies that they were going to include. So this is something that you'll want to look for when you're looking at systematic reviews, because this is usually the format that's used for a flowchart. Then finally, let's look at this example. It says a systematic review and meta-analysis. And this is something that you'll often see with systematic reviews. So a meta-analysis is a different type of research methodology. It's actually a statistical approach. So when researchers are looking at different studies that have been done on the same topic, same population, if they decide that they're similar enough that the data can all be combined and then reanalyzed together using advanced statistical methods, then that's called doing a meta-analysis. And you'll often see a systematic review and meta-analysis done in conjunction. So this is considered a very high level of research because when you pool data from different studies and analyze them together, then you're getting a much more powerful analysis of the data. But one thing to keep in mind for this course is that most students in this class don't have a solid enough foundation in advanced statistics to understand a meta-analysis because that hasn't been incorporated into your coursework. You wouldn't be expected to be able to understand that. So for that reason, some professors will encourage you to just search for a systematic review that does not include a meta-analysis. So that way you don't have to worry about those advanced statistics. If you do find an article that you're really excited about, you know that it's a systematic review, and it also includes a meta-analysis, then you can talk to your professor, and sometimes they're willing to let you just look at the systematic review portion and not worry about the meta-analysis portion. Sometimes it will be too integrated or too complicated to do that, so they'll really want you to search for something that's just a systematic review. So just keep that in mind as you're searching for your systematic reviews. Now that we've talked about what a systematic review is, and you can hopefully recognize one, in the next videos we're going to talk about ways that you can search for systematic reviews using the library databases.